Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the University of Hull PhD cluster entitled Exercise for Improving Cancer Treatment Efficacy, as the acronym ESPRI. My name is John Saxton. I'm Professor of Clinical Exercise Physiology and Head of the Department of Sport, Health and Exercise Science at the University of Hull. I'm also the lead and main contact point for this PhD cluster. I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening and hope you find this webinar helpful. I have a bit of housekeeping information to start this webinar. Firstly, I just need to let you know that this webinar session will be recorded, and that's with a view to providing a link to the recorded session for anyone who wants it afterwards. This webinar will include short presentations from the supervisors of all PhD cluster projects in this cluster, followed by a question and answer session at the end. So please, could you submit your questions using the chat function along the way, using your web browser, and we'll aim to address these questions at the end of the presentation, but you can put the questions in the chat function at any time during the session. So we're going to kick this webinar off with a short video on the topic of postgraduate research at the University of Hull. Thank you.
Postgraduate research is critically important to the university. All fantastic researchers have been student researchers. We're a people business. It's all about people. We put significant investment ourselves into our research student studies. We have about 40 scholarships currently at the moment that we offer. They're funded, both the fees and a stipend to help with the living costs of doing that. We have access to other funded PhD schemes throughout the DTPs, the CDTs, and we've got things called Aura, which look at the offshore wind industry. We've got the White Rose, we've got Heritage. There's a whole range of things in there.
The University of Hull is a fantastic place to do a research degree. Hull is a small city that's within easy reach of the coast and countryside. It's also one of the most affordable places in the UK to live and study.
The best thing about being a postgraduate researcher at Hull is that it's the right size, so you're not just kind of lost in the crowd. You kind of get more one-on-one attention. I really enjoy doing research and figuring out new things. For me, a PhD means synthesizing new knowledge and getting to contribute something to the field. My supervisory team has been really supportive from the very start. They had been really supportive going through the process of getting a visa and, you know, who to email, who to contact. It made me feel like they cared about me. They're incredibly supportive, and they're two of the most knowledgeable people that I know as well. Being an international student at Hull, I think is just like being any other student. I think it's a really diverse community, and everybody's been really welcoming from the start.
I am a PhD student at the Department of Biomedical Sciences. I'm funded through the PET Healthcare Technologies Research Cluster. I specialise in drug delivery to the lungs. We have one person specialising in artificial intelligence, someone developing new tracers to detect different cancers, and a final student looking at some microfluidic devices. At Hull, we have some really fantastic research facilities. We have a PET RC, or positron emission tomography research centre. We have a dedicated preclinical cyclotron, and we're able to generate our own radiation on demand, which is pretty cool. My career plan is to move to industry. I recently secured a job down in London following some work experience my supervisor set up for me before I started my PhD, and I'll be working there as a lead radiochemist.
The doctoral college supports postgraduate researchers in a number of ways. Most importantly, they're a central point of contact at any stage in a postgraduate researcher's journey. We have one of the best skills teams in the country, and they offer a dedicated programme of postgraduate training courses.
There are amazing benefits of doing a research degree here at Hull. And there's a brilliant research culture where you get to meet other PGRs, share your ideas and experiences, and help peer support each other through your research journey. The postgraduate training scheme is Hull's sector-leading, free accredited research training programme, which you do alongside your main research degree, whether that's a master's or a PhD. We also offer a lot of extracurricular activities as well. It's designed to help you develop your research, professional and personal skills.
I would recommend Hull to other PGR students because I think that Hull is really up and coming, and that's an exciting place to be in research.
I would recommend Hull to other postgraduate researchers. It's a great city, great place to be a student, and also there is some fantastic research being done here.
Okay, so can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. So this is a title slide. It shows that the acronym for this PhD cluster is ESPRIT. And as I mentioned before, this stands for Exercise for Improving Cancer Treatment Efficacy. It's a really exciting collaboration between clinical and non-clinical scientists from the University of Hull Faculty of Health Sciences, that is the Department of Sport, Health and Exercise Science, and the Hull York Medical School, and the Hull Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. So I'm really excited about this new collaboration. Members of the supervisory teams for all four projects are shown. You can see on the left, so I have a list of outstanding PhD supervisors. And also that's backed up by a really good team of clinical advisors, clinical collaborators, we can see in the middle. So, and all these supervisors, these clinical, non-clinical scientists will be part of this cluster and will be supporting this cluster. Next slide, please. Okay, so just as a means of providing a little bit of background information to these PhD projects, this is just shows some of the epidemiological evidence, and there's been a lot of epidemiological studies now, and if you look at the top line, many epidemiological studies have investigated associations between a physically active lifestyle and cancer risk, the risk of developing cancer. And what the conclusion of one of the most recent systematic reviews is that a physically active lifestyle reduces the risk of developing at least 7 common cancers, and that's impressive in its own right. But then, in relation to survival, we also have a lot of epidemiological evidence to show that a physically active lifestyle after curative intent cancer treatment improves survival outcomes in at least 9 common cancers. So even after being diagnosed with cancer, exercise can have a really important part to play in improving treatment outcome. Next slide, please. So it's quite a lot of detail on this slide, but so just based on the epidemiological evidence I've just presented, it's easy to see why a relatively new research area, which has been termed exercise oncology, has emerged from this evidence. And so the question is, where does this PhD cluster fit in? And if you look at this diagram, which shows a timeline of cancer diagnosis and its treatment pathways, and an accumulated evidence base shows that exercise can bring health benefits to cancer patients all the way through the cancer timeline or the treatment journey. So we've just seen evidence that exercise can reduce the risk of developing cancer. And then if you look to the right of this diagram, following treatment, patients going to a recovery and rehabilitation pathway or end-of-life care. And there's been a lot of research, if you look at the red arrow, there's been a lot of research that's looked at the health benefits of exercise and lifestyle interventions in patients who have completed their primary treatment for cancer. And there's a lot of emerging evidence showing that exercise brings lots of physiological benefits and has potential to help prevent or reduce the risk of cancer recurrence in that red pathway there. And that's, I guess, where I've spent most of the last 20 years of my life, in that particular space, working with cancer patients and understanding the health benefits of exercise in that space. If you look at the short window of time between diagnosis and treatment, you'll see prehabilitation, and there's a lot of interest at the moment in getting patients fit for their treatment, in particular getting patients fit before they have cancer surgery, and there's a lot of studies in that area at the moment. This PhD cluster is slightly to the right of that, and it's in the space which is asking the question, what evidence is there, or what evidence can we generate that exercise can actually improve treatment efficacy? So exercise during treatment, during chemotherapy cycles, radiotherapy cycles, what evidence is there in humans? Or can we generate some evidence to show that exercise can actually improve treatment efficacy and also attenuate some of the harmful side effects of common treatments like chemotherapy and radiotherapy? And there's a lot of interest is being focused in that particular space at this point in time. So this PhD cluster is very timely in terms of the bigger picture. So next slide, please. So I'm going to just kick this off with some further details of this particular. So this is one of the PhD projects involved in the cluster, and it's entitled Exercise for Improving Chemoradiotherapy Efficacy in Patients Diagnosed with Esophagogastric and Colorectal Cancers. Now, Hull is one of the leading centers, a regional center for esophagogastric cancers. So we have a really unique opportunity to work with these patients, and also it treats a lot of colorectal cancer patients as well. So the supervisory team for this project are myself, Mohan Ingarani, and Victoria Brown. Mohan is the lead for radiotherapy at the local hospital trust, and Victoria is the lead for chemotherapy. So we have the right members of the team on board here. And this project is built on, I guess, preclinical evidence. There was a recent systematic review that showed that aerobic exercise can improve chemotherapy efficacy in animal studies, and that was the case in 6 of 7 preclinical studies. And there's also some emerging evidence from human intervention studies, clinical studies, to show that exercise during these treatments can actually have a beneficial effect on the treatments and in terms of treatment efficacy. Now, this on the right-hand side, this hasn't come out too well because I developed this on a Mac computer, and it's obviously not translated too well to PC. But effectively, what this shows is it's an exercise model that I have previously shown is feasible in the cancer care pathways, particularly in bladder cancer and colorectal cancer patients. And it's an exercise model that provides a strong exercise stimulus for cardiopulmonary adaptations. It's vigorous intensity aerobic interval exercise on a cycloergometer, which can be embedded in the care pathway in a hospital setting. And we've shown that this type of vigorous intensity aerobic exercise is a good stimulus. It engages lots of muscle mass, gets the heart and lungs working. So intuitively, you feel that this is the type of exercise that would bring benefits, especially if you look at the preclinical studies, which have mainly looked at aerobic exercise. And we know that this is feasible for even frail cancer patients. So the exercise is likely to look something like this, although that is part of the project to develop a model that can be embedded feasibly in the cancer care pathway. And as well as feasibility outcomes, we'll start to look at some treatment efficacy markers, things like tumor regression scores, pathological complete response. And we'll be able to look at some biomarkers in tumor tissues and that type of thing. And I guess the important thing will be to see what the literature is saying about what are the useful markers here, and we can apply those in this particular study. So that's just a little overview of one of the studies. I'm now going to hand over to Doctors Becky Vince and Andy Simpson, who will talk you through another of these projects, which is focused on cardiotoxicity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Dr. Rebecca Vince. I'm a senior lecturer in health physiology in the Department of Sport, Health and Exercise Science. So I have a degree and PhD in biomedical science, but at the moment my specialist interest is in terms of exercise programming for physical activity research and then cellular biochemistry in different clinical populations. So I have a big interest in the stress response and then looking at different exercise, medical and then nutritional interventions to be able to attenuate that stress on the body at a cellular level. So overall, my research interests, so I wasn't ready to move on, but it doesn't matter. In terms of improving health and well-being, I suppose in clinical and then special populations as well. So the idea is that you have this ability to be able to design and implement different programs for a particular purpose. And we want them to be feasible, of course we do. We want them to be easy to follow. We want them to be well tolerated, not only to achieve short-term goals, but then also have participants have those knowledge and skills to then be able to promote those longer term health beyond the application of our study for, I suppose, more positive future health behaviours, then still using all those kind of sound principles to achieve those best adaptations. We also do quite a lot of qualitative research alongside to be able to achieve the best strategy for the individual. And I'm very much interested in this in terms of knowing what people think. So I've been involved in a lot of different clinical studies and lead a team of multidisciplinary researchers to create personalised health apps based on individual exercise programs, wellbeing programs that then break down those kind of common barriers. We need to be able to make people be able to access our programs as well as we possibly can, and then use that feedback that we gather to ensure that the development continues to best meet those that is designed to help. So I am interested very much in people's thoughts, attitudes, perspectives, with working with people with specific conditions like this one in terms of developing clinical interventions and different nutritional and exercise programs that then meet their needs so that it is user-friendly and that we can essentially build on that kind of end-user feedback. Just looking at this slide here, just looking at the title, what this project is going to be about is looking at acute exercise for ameliorating the cardiotoxic side effects of adjuvant treatments in patients diagnosed with oesophagogastric and colorectal cancers. So overall, the project aims to investigate the cardiotoxic side effects of chemotherapy and radiotherapy and the two different cancer types, and then looking at the effects of exercise as an adjunct treatment. So the overarching plan, I suppose, is to be able to demonstrate kind of proof of concept evidence that acute exercise can influence and then potentially improve the efficacy of chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatments in cancer patients. And if we just look a little bit more about that kind of project breakdown that I've given there, we start off with ethics, of course we do. And that is a difficult process in itself, but very necessary. And most likely a systematic review to be able to get a really good grip of the current literature so we know that we've got a good basis to start upon. So the systematic review will focus on studies that have investigated the cardiotoxic effects of cancer treatments and then the role in exercise in both preclinical and clinical studies in terms of ameliorating these kind of harmful side effects. So we are looking to review the literature investigating the cardiotoxic effects of cancer treatments and the role of exercise to then try and reduce those side effects. We want to be able to be identifying the relevant biomarkers to demonstrate the stress response and then the potential adaptations in this study. So what we are essentially looking to be able to do from the systematic review is to identify what are the objective and then the measurable indices of cardiotoxicity in this study, and then whether or not our exercise program can reduce or prevent them. Following on from that, the more kind of experimental work, I suppose, would be involving running the exercise trial, assessing cardiovascular function and the cardiotoxicity markers in terms of using the cohorts identified in terms of Project 1 and Project 2. This will likely include echocardiographic scans of hemodynamic function, so looking at left ventricular function and longitudinal strain. We want to be able to look at those kind of bloodborne markers, the biomarkers of cardiotoxicity. So it might include things like cardiac troponins in terms of being sensitive and specific biomarkers of cardiac damage, the natural uretic peptides as potential biomarkers of cardiac toxicity. We might want to look at some other ones as well, such as C-reactive protein, different reactive oxygen species, myeloperoxidase, and others potentially. Potentially as well, markers of vascular endothelial functions have a big interest in the endothelium, and I would like to look specifically at these ideally. So I think overall what we're hoping to do is look at markers that are well established, and then some markers that are more exploratory as well. And some of that will be based on the literature review, the systematic review that we do, and then others more aligned to the previous work that we've done as a team before. So we're looking to take venous blood samples, and the markers will be assessed at baseline, so pre-treatment, and then follow-up post-treatment, and potentially a further follow-up too, looking at our exercise groups and then the usual care controls. So what we're looking to do, I suppose, is overall to demonstrate the feasibility of implementing exercise and then collecting those cardiotoxicity outcome measures. What we're hoping to do is be able to yield, I suppose, more preliminary mechanistic data to be able to provide those kind of new insights into how exercise ameliorates the cardiotoxic effects of the treatments. There is also some scope here to work with looking at some more respiratory measures. So Dr. Andrew Simpson, who you just were introduced to, he is a fabulous respiratory specialist, and we would like to potentially investigate this a little bit further, maybe looking at respiratory measures that may be linked to more pulmonary complications. There might be scope within some of the because of the cancer types that they are and the interventions that we're using, that we might want to look at some assessments of nutritional status and then functional assessments. So all the things that kind of infer those activities of daily living. So a screen that looks at those kind of basic self-care tasks that an individual does on a day-to-day basis to indicate the overall health status of a person. And then just going back to what I was saying on the slide before, I'm very interested in terms of quality of life specific measures, and one of my colleagues will talk about this in far more detail. But we would like to maybe think there might be some potential scope to look at surveys within this cohort and then potentially a wider population, just to give that indication in terms of their thoughts and perspectives, the barriers to exercise participation in terms of treatment. As I said on the previous slide, I've got a big interest in knowing people's thoughts and opinions and perspectives, looking at different clinical interventions in terms of different nutrition and exercise programs to make sure it meets the needs of the people that we want it to. We need to make sure that everything is user-friendly, that they can engage and then further develop those sorts of interventions so that it can then be scaled up and utilised. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of the wider team. So obviously you just met Professor John Saxton. He is the cluster lead and will be the lead for Project 1. Myself and Dr. Andrew Simpson will be running Project 2, which I've just been talking about, and then the professor at the end. Professor Satya Palin is one of our professors in terms of diabetes and academic endocrinology at Hull York Medical School. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Hello everyone. If I'm allowed to introduce myself briefly, my name is Antonios Matsakas. I am a senior lecturer in biomedical sciences. I'm running the Laboratory of Molecular Physiology within the Center of Atherothrombosis and Metabolic Disease based at the Hull York Medical School. The main focus of my research is the regenerative capacity of skeletal muscle, either in response to acute injury or in the context of disease, but also the adaptation of skeletal muscle to a variety of environmental stimuli, such as regular exercise or dietary challenges. Next slide, please. I'm the lead for a project within the cluster of ESPRIT on the aiming to study the acute exercise effects on the myotoxic side effects of chemotherapy in cancer patients. This is a laboratory-based project aiming to combine both basic science in vitro data and clinical data from patients. We know that chemotherapy has several side effects, negative effects on different tissues, different organs, and one of them is skeletal muscle. Chemotherapy induces myofiber atrophy and cellular senescence. This is mainly due to increased proteolysis, reduced protein synthesis, and increased apoptosis and autophagy. So in simple terms, the skeletal muscle is quite heavily affected by most schemes of chemotherapy. On the other hand, we have recently shown that the platelets from the blood, when isolated in the lab, activated, and chemically treated, we are able to isolate their secretome. And their secretome is a unique autologous biomaterial that can be used in terms of regenerative purposes, not only for the muscle, but for several other tissues. You may have read about the platelet-rich plasma, which is one form of platelet secretome, and its application on different tissues. So the platelet-derived growth factors have gained a lot of attention during the last decade in several aspects of regenerative medicine. And we hypothesize in this project that chemotherapy would affect the skeletal muscle, which is known, and by using the secretome of growth factors from cancer patients, we would be able to test it in the lab on muscle cells and primary murine stem cells, and secondly, to use prescribed exercise from clinical studies and see how the muscle qualities, the muscle characteristics change with exercise. On the right side of the slide, there are a brief overview of the different pathways, of some of the different pathways that are affected by chemotherapy. So we are going to model in this project the use of doxorubicin, and doxorubicin is chemotherapeutic drug which is widely used in several malignancies against cancer since the 60s. And the way it works is that it inhibits DNA replication and induces cancer cell death. But on the other hand, it's myotoxic. For example, we know that it affects mitochondria. We have increased mitochondrial degradation, we have increased proteolysis, we have increased apoptosis, we have reduced protein synthesis. These are some of the pathways affected by chemotherapy. So we are going to study the mechanisms by which the platelet secretome may be able to alleviate some of the detrimental effects of doxorubicin on either skeletal muscle cells in vitro or primary myoblasts in culture. Overall, the project will provide new data on cellular mechanisms involved in the myotoxic effects of chemotherapy, and the applicant will mainly work in the lab, so wet lab techniques and skills are highly favorable for this project. The protein biochemistry, histology, immunofluorescence, gene expression are some of the techniques that the applicant will gain training and will be required for the implementation of this project. Next slide, please. So I'm the main supervisor of this project, and the project is co-supervised as well by Professor Saxton. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Maureen Twiddy, and I'm the a lead supervisor for the fourth project in the ESPRI cluster. My background is actually in psychology, but I do health services research. So in contrast to the studies you've been listening to and looking at so far, I'm actually looking right at the end of the pathway. If we can show that we can have good efficacy of these interventions, we really want to be able to embed them into clinical practice. So my work has been very much about how we improve care pathways for patients. So at the moment I'm working in areas as diverse as alcohol pathways. I've looked at antibiotic pathways. So I'm interested in how we embed new practices into health services. Next slide, please. So as Professor Saxon talked about in his first slide, we've got a lot of evidence about how exercise is good in rehabilitation. And as you'll see from this slide, from the picture on the right-hand side, there's a really growing interest about prehabilitation. But we're actually looking at that bit in the middle. So we're interested in while the patients are actually having active treatment. So that's when they're actually feeling at their most ill. So current guidance does suggest that people living with cancer should be active. And there was a report from the American College of Sports Medicine that concluded that exercise training is safe for this group. So we need to think about how we can encourage people to be active. And because if we don't manage to overcome this particular barrier, all of our efficacy, all of our effectiveness data isn't going to be taken up by health services and by patients. So the literature suggests there's actually quite a range of barriers that have already been identified, particularly around patient barriers. So much of the research is focused on motivation to change, motivation to exercise. So people are feeling quite ill, so they don't want to exercise. They're experiencing cancer-related fatigue. They're living with comorbidities such as arthritis or heart disease. And there's also really practical things like just access to treatments, access to exercise facilities where patients would be supported to exercise in a safe way. There's also really good evidence, particularly around in the rehab setting, that the family can be quite protective, that families suggest patients should rest, should take it easy, they're recovering from their cancer. And healthcare professionals say the same thing. So there's quite good anecdotal evidence that quite often health professionals are also suggesting to patients to rest up. But there are other barriers for healthcare providers. They may be reluctant to discuss exercise because they themselves lack the knowledge of the benefits and the risks associated with exercise. And that might mean that they don't feel confident to give good advice. It may also be because actually they do recognise the barriers to patients. And so they're hesitant to give advice and to suggest that patients are active because they know about how many barriers there are, and they don't want to add to a patient's sort of mental load at a time when they're coping with so much. For some patients, there would be cultural barriers, particularly around actually physically being in mixed settings or wearing particular clothes. And there might be organisational factors, such as a lack of provision of exercise facilities, a workplace culture that either supports or acts as a barrier to exercise. We know there's great uncertainty about whose role it is to give information to patients about being active and what form that should take. So should it be the role of the exercise physiologist or the oncologist? And there is a lack of, certainly within the NHS, a lack of a clear referral pathway that means that patients aren't, even when things are available, patients are not sent through that pathway and don't actually get the support that they want. Lots of the evidence we've got so far, though, relates actually to rehabilitation, so the time after patients have had their active treatment. But it's likely that many of the same challenges will exist in that treatment pathway as well. So if exercise during cancer treatment is to become normal practice, and not just something that we offer within a clinical trial, so within a very defined setting, or offer it just as Macmillan, who's one of the cancer charities in the UK, offer at particular centres, we need to go beyond understanding what the barriers are and try to identify effective interventions that can address those barriers. So this PhD will actually be about working with patients and with healthcare professionals and other stakeholders to identify what the barriers are, but also working with them to test out practical strategies to support the implementation of exercise in clinical practice. So we need to understand what patients think, what staff think, what families think, what are the organisational and management challenges, and how should we address them. So this studentship offers a brilliant opportunity to explore what is a really new niche area and to add to our understanding of what is a very complex issue. So we've built into the studentship the opportunity to learn skills around evidence synthesis. So the first step will be, as with all PhDs, a review of the literature to find out what we already know. There's likely to be survey design, surveying health professionals to find out what the barriers are from their perspective. Qualitative methods, interviews, perhaps with staff and with patients. And it will all be underpinned by implementation science, which is the science of actually understanding how we implement things in clinical practice. There will be opportunities perhaps for co-design of new interventions with health professionals and patients. This will be very exploratory. It will be in part down to the students' interests and what we find out from patients and health professionals. So the final parts of the PhD at this point are quite open, but we may be understanding either providing recommendations or testing out small interventions. Next slide, please. So the team. So I am the lead supervisor and my background is psychology. I'm joined by a brilliant team, Julie Wallerbecki, who is a medically trained qualitative research fellow in the Hull York Medical School. Her background, her work at the moment is around cancer, particularly around cancer survivorship and early diagnosis. Professor John Saxton, who you've already met at the beginning of this presentation, he will bring all the expertise in clinical exercise physiology. And Dr. Vicky Brown is the lead for chemotherapy in the NHS Trust, so she will bring her medical expertise. So you'll be surrounded by a multidisciplinary research team to supervise your studentship. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I hope you can hear me. I didn't hear much of that, so I'm looking forward to seeing the recording. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to all the supervisors for talking through the projects. I really appreciate that. I hope that was informative for everyone who has joined the webinar this evening. We do have a few questions coming in already. So while people may be thinking about questions, please do ask questions using the chat function. Don't be shy. Anything you want to know, please put it in that chat function now, and then we can at least try and answer any queries that you have. So just while you're thinking of some questions, just to say a little bit more about the cohesion of the cluster. So this is very much we envisage this to be very much a cohesive PhD cluster. There are 4 interrelated PhDs here, and the intention is for this to be highly cohesive, with all appointed students keeping in regular contact and having the opportunity to report on and discuss their progress. So in this way, sharing ideas, and in this way benefiting from a broader understanding of the field and in the context of their work. All students will benefit from the support systems offered by the doctoral college, and also will have opportunities to attend numerous research seminars that happen in the Department of Sport, Health and Exercise Science, the medical school, the Hull York Medical School, and also in the clinical setting at the Hull University's Teaching Hospitals Trust, as well as attending things like multidisciplinary meetings, in which you'll really get to understand, what the treatment is about. What are the patients going through? How are decisions made about which treatment to give to different patients? So that will all be part of these projects. Next is as you can. There's no doubt you'll have gleaned that this cluster is truly interdisciplinary. So the studies range from molecular, so understanding the mechanisms here. So from the molecular biological side of the spectrum, right through to the patient experience and understanding how exercise can be embedded within the care pathway, taking into consideration system level, logistical, socio-cultural factors influencing implementation. So, we pride ourselves on the fact that this cluster is truly interdisciplinary. And because it's going to be so cohesive, students will really gain a broader understanding of the importance of their work and where it fits into the continuum. So that's just a little bit more information. You can hear me, that's good. So I'm going to start reading out I think it's 3 questions here. So the first question is from Jake Berman, and Jake asks, is it possible that the definition of acute exercise may be dependent on the patient's physical condition in relation to the impact their treatment has on their individual physical condition? Or will that be considered during patient enrollment? So that's a really good question, and obviously prescribed exercise has to be influenced by the physical capacity and the physical condition of the patient. The good thing about weight-supported aerobic exercise, such as the cycloergometry protocol I showed earlier, is that it is weight-supported, and you can prescribe an intensity of that exercise that is individualized. So it's dependent upon the current fitness of the patient, the current clinical status of the patient. And it's surprising, but we did some work in Norwich where we tested this out in frail bladder cancer patients, and even frail bladder cancer patients were able to tolerate this type of exercise, this weight-supported cycloergometry exercise, and within a week or 2, they were increasing the number of repetitions they could perform at that vigorous intensity. So in many respects, the feasibility of this has been proven, and you can individualize it based on the condition and fitness of the patient. So I hope that answers the question, Jake. Let's have a look here. So there's a question about the requirements, say 2-1 first degree. Can current PGTs, people on postgraduate talk programs with a 2-2 first degree still apply? I would say yes. If you've got a second-class undergraduate degree and a master's degree, then definitely I would say yes, apply. Prerequisites required to be considered for the scholarships. So please look on the website for the prerequisites that are required for these scholarships. Generally, it is an upper, a good degree, either a first or a 2-1. Preferably with a master's, but not necessarily definitely with a master's degree. but all the further details are on the website, so please have a look at that. These are so another one from Jake Berman. As a BSc Biomedical Science and MSc Translational Oncology graduate, would it be advised to apply for all of the positions? As I find them all very interesting. Well, that's brilliant. I'm really pleased about that, Jake. Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me that you know, you're more on the biological side, physiological side. So there's nothing stopping you from applying for more than one. I guess you'd have to put in separate applications to make sure that, you know, the shortlisting is done correctly. So I would, if you're interested in more than one, I would say apply for more than one. Okay, great. There's a question for someone else. So this is from Zhan Yuan Zhang. It's a question for Dr. Matsakas. So Antonios, I have a biochemistry background. My laboratory experience is mostly in analytical chemistry. Would you consider students with theoretical background in genetics, please? And that's for Antonios.
Thank you, John. Yeah, absolutely. Any biomedical, biological, health science related background with laboratory experience is going to be beneficial for and favorable for the project. So I wouldn't discourage anyone to apply with such a strong skills such as in analytical chemistry or so. Of course, training will be provided for the techniques required for the project, but several skills are transferable. Even if the project doesn't include analytical chemistry, the pipetting, the record keeping, the calculations, etc., are going to be essential for the project. So the long story short, the answer is yes.
I think you've finished. I can't hear you talking anymore, Antonios. Thank you for that. There is one more question on the chat from Ander Deboran. Thank you for your interesting presentation! Exclamation mark. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Ander. Thank you very much. Could you please say which are the dates for applying and starting work on the PhD? So I think the closing date is early January to get your application. I think it might be the 7th of January for the deadline for applications to be submitted. And then the start date for these studentships is September. It's September 2022. So that's when, so we'll be shortlisting in January, interviewing in the first quarter of 2022 with a start date of September 2022. I have a follow-up question from Zhuan Yuan, who asked Antonios a question. He says, thank you, or he or she says, thank you very much. Would it be all right to email you with more details later today, please? If that's okay, can you put your thumb up, Antonios?
Yeah, that would be okay. Just to clarify something, I have been contacted by several potential applicants saying, here is my CV, please consider me. I would like to say that there is a formal process in place. You should apply through the website of the university. I cannot consider any emails, but any question can be answered via email, so that's not a problem, of course.
Thank you, Antonios. I think you finished. Jake Berman again, in terms of career options following the PhD positions, what kind of roles could the successful applicants see themselves in the future? So, I mean, the obvious one is a research career, is a career in academia. I think this is the this area of research, I think, is going to expand. There's a lot of interest in this particular area at the moment. So I think, you know, you'll be at the cutting edge, potential to apply for grants and things. I would think there'd be industrial possibilities for graduates. I'd say most of my graduates have ended up in research positions or have gone on to other universities. Do anybody else want to answer that question in terms of career options, the type of career options for graduates once they've graduated?
I can. We've had quite a number. I've been at the department since 2008, so I think I'm probably the best one to say. A lot of our graduates go on to do research positions. An awful lot go on to be lecturers themselves. I've got some of my own PhD students that were promoted way before me and are now like doing very, very, very well in additional institutions. Some of them are in industry as well. Quite a lot of our graduates, probably not more so towards this project, but quite a lot of them have gone to work in professional sport. So I can't think of a single PhD student that we have had that I wouldn't say has a very successful job, actually. I think they've all done incredibly well.
Any more offers? That sounded like a comprehensive answer, Becky. I couldn't quite catch it, but I think it was comprehensive. Thank you very much. I hope that's answered the question. We have a question for Dr. Twiddy now. Dr. Twiddy, I have a BSc in physiotherapy and currently completing an MSc in adult nursing, due to be complete in August 2022. Do you have to have, I guess that means, do you have to have a psychology background to apply for this project? Maureen, please.
Absolutely not. With somebody like yourself with a physiotherapy and a nursing background would be ideally placed. This is really a PhD for anybody who has, yes, psychology, sociology, nursing, therapy background, or actually sort of more general your health services, your background. So yes, this is a very we're a broad church. In qualitative research, we can be a lot more flexible in terms of where you come from your discipline, as long as you have some experience of qualitative methods already, and that might be, as that could even be as broad as from business and politics. So don't think about it as just being a psychology. This is about understanding care pathways. So for a nursing background, perfect.
Thank you, Maureen. I think you've finished. I think I can't hear you talking anymore. Thank you, Maureen. We have a question. I'm going to pass this on to whoever wants to answer this one. So this is from Latamide Fadeep. What personal and professional opinions can you give about having a gap year between Masters and PhD, or moving directly from a Masters to a PhD? Do you have any views on that, having a gap year or moving straight from a Masters to a PhD?
Shall I go first? Go on, Maureen.
Maureen.
Rebecca, if you want to go now, I'll follow on.
I personally think that people should do what makes them happy. I think it depends on what opportunities come your way. I think a lot of people would say that once you're kind of in that education system and kind of continuing to learn, that maybe you want to kind of continue that if that's your passion. If an amazing opportunity came up that made you a more well-rounded individual, a better academic, whatever it is, I think it really just depends on personal circumstances. There is no right and wrong answer to that, in my opinion. I think it really is dependent on what you want to do and what you need to do to get there. So I don't think there's an easy answer. I think it's just a personal thing.
Thank you. Maureen, did you want to say something?
Yeah. I would absolutely agree. Some people taking a year off and broadening your skills, especially if, for example, if you're coming from a background that's quite different and you want to do something that's health related, having a year of work experience in the health sector is a great way of learning and understanding the setting you're going to work in. But it really is about what works for you. There isn't a right way to do this. I did this in my 30s, so there isn't a right path. It's just the right path for you.
I'll have a quick go as well. I'll join in. I'm going to reiterate what everyone said. I had a gap year for about 5 years in between mine, and some of that was the development. There was relevant jobs within that, but some of it was to scratch an itch and see a bit of the world and to develop myself and find myself. So yeah, whatever you need to do. Once you start a PhD, it's a fairly fast road that you're on. So if you want to go out, see the world, get it out of your system, and enjoy yourself, yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I think thanks very much for that, folks. There is another question for Maureen, which is an eligibility question. I am a medical doctor with a public health specialty and a master's in international public health from the UK. Please, Maureen, am I eligible to apply?
Absolutely. Yes, please do apply. Yeah, because this isn't something, yes, we're going to focus this study in the UK, but there'll be an awful lot you can draw on from your public health background that will be useful in this, in this PhD. So yes, please do apply.
Thank you. Just to clarify that international students can apply for these studentships, but we can only cover the UK fee waiver. So the remaining, the balance has to be made up by the student in some way. That just to clarify that. But if you need more information, please contact the doctoral college. And there's another one here. Okay, one more question. I think we've got 3 minutes, so this could be the final question from Thomas Burrell for Dr. Vince. Is a cancer-specific background required for your study? I'm currently completing a respiratory-based MRes with Dr. Simpson and would be potentially interested to branch into exercise with cancer.
For me, no, I don't think having a cancer-specific background, what you need to have is a very big interest in cancer. So obviously, everything can be taught. I think there is going to be a heavy kind of biochem component, I imagine, to this project, but we're still in discussions about how Project 1 and Project 2 are going to run and kind of align. So it might be that there is a cancer each and that you do the kind of exercise program and then the biochem and maybe some qualitative stuff for each, or it might be that one project takes one side and one project takes the other. We're still having those kinds of discussions, but in terms of having a cancer-specific background, I don't think so. I think the biochemistry techniques can be taught. It's obviously favourable if you do have some previous biochem knowledge. Sometimes I actually think it's harder to teach the exercise programming, I think, than it is to teach the more kind of bench biochemistry. So I don't think you need to worry about that. I think what we're looking for is truly passionate people that are going to really commit to this project. This is an amazing opportunity. I think a lot of us would have done kind of PhDs on our own. This is an amazing opportunity to work fully, obviously, on your own project, but as a wider team and a big community to drive this very quickly forwards. So what we're looking for is dedicated people, I would say, and a lot of what we're asking people to do can be taught as well. So I don't think you need to worry about not having a cancer specific background per se.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar this evening. We really appreciate it. We hope it's been helpful and useful. If you have any further questions, please email the contacts that are on the bottom of the advert on the website. We'll get back to you with any further questions. So just thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll be interested in applying for one of these positions. Thank you.